And with that, we are streaming live. It is the Astro Weather. I'm Robert Phoenix. 22123. How is everybody this morning? We're coming off an interesting weekend, no doubt. A lot of energy over the weekend. Big energy on Saturday and Sunday for sure. As Mars picks up momentum and catapults us ever forward into the burgeoning chaos that is Pluto in Aquarius. Is it the light at the end of the tunnel? I don't know. Or is it another tunnel at the end of the tunnel? We'll find out shortly. So we're going to get into the astro weather today, and we have a sign change. And normally I do sign change stuff on the Sunday night show. And unfortunately, this Sunday night show, I didn't quite do it. Although I did get into the Piscean world with Saturn in Pisces. We talked about East Palestine. We talked about the Asbury revival, which is supposed to be shut down, I believe, tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. I guess it's the last day they're going to allow outsiders onto the campus to be a part of this religious and spiritual phenomena taking place in Wilmore, Kentucky. So I did talk about that, but we're in a new season. We're in Pisces season, and the characters of the stars of the day are decidedly different. You know, there tends to be at the early part of the month, of course, some Aquarian overlap with planets like Mercury and Venus because they're in the orbit, right? That said, they're very different characters. You know, we find more artists and more writers and more spiritual in some ways, what I would call spiritual figures with Pisces. And today's star of the day kind of kicks us off in that direction. Very interesting person. But Pisces is a sign, you know, with Aquarius, you could look at the fact that you would have Andrew Breitbart and Angela Davis born in the same month. You know, Ronald Reagan, an Aquarian and a radical too in his own way. I mean, Reagan was a break from the sort of the democratic, liberal, progressive wing that was trying to establish itself with Jimmy Carter, and you know, with the arrival of Reagan, theoretically, it was the end of the culture war, and that the left had lost. No, the left just went underground. Really, 8 years later, actually 12 years later, with the arrival of Bill Clinton, we see a very, very different topography. But with Pisces, you'll get some rebels. There's some rebels in there, but it's not like Aquarius. You know, Aquarius, it's always the maverick, the rebel, somebody who is cutting against the grain in terms of how they're interacting with so-called culture. Pisces doesn't have the same kinds of touch points, doesn't have the same kind of through lines. You know, Pisces is much more about feeling and emotion and communion in a lot of ways, and losing oneself, sometimes to the detriment of the self. You know, this is where we get into the Piscean relationship with things like alcohol and drugs that take the person out of, you know, their everyday experience. And there's plenty of druggies in Pisces. We'll see some of them as we move through the sign. But early in the sign, there's still a bit of an Aquarian overlap. So we'll see some people early on that may have a bit of a rebellious streak to them, but the overlay is very different than Aquarius. And I've said this before about Pisces. You get 100 Pisces together in a room, and you'll get 100 different stories. And there may be some commonality, but very different. You know, it's a sign that has all the other signs a part of it. So let's bring up the chart for today, and I'll show you a little bit about Pisces. So think of the 12th house as an ocean. Because that's really what it is. It's an ocean of consciousness. And I don't know why I'm seeing myself here. Give me 1 second. I don't know. I can only see myself too much, or else I go schizophrenic. Okay. So this is the ocean of consciousness. And every single house and sign is like a tributary. And they all empty into the 12th house. So when you see the 12th house and you see Pisces, one of the reasons why Pisces is such a difficult sign is because it has every other sign inside of it. That's the challenge of Pisces. And that's why you'll get variegations of the individual with Pisces. Well, let's take a look at what's happening now. So we have this moon, right? Here we go. We are in the new moon phase. How about that? And we entered into the new moon phase really officially yesterday. New moon on Monday. I should have queued up Duran Duran for a Sunday night show, although I would have gotten a copyright strike. So we're in feeling mode today with Moon Neptune. You know, we've been really in this Venus Neptune conjunction. Venus is in Aries now, so we've been in this dissolve space, and you can even see that with this whole event at Asbury College in Kentucky, where the relationship with spirit becomes very thin. The veil thins. Now we have the moon here, and you know, when you're in Venus, you're in communion, right? You're in communion with others. With the moon, not as much. The moon is much more personal. So today is one of those days where people are seeking refuge, right? They want sanctity, they want peace. People want a sense of safe harbor. Enter Mars. Good old Mars. Mars is really the culprit here, and will be more of the culprit in the coming weeks here, the next couple of weeks, especially as the sun moves through Pisces and we start getting into that Sun Mars square. And on my 15 minutes of flame show, which I do at 9/11 over on my 15 minutes of flame, that's OV channel, I'm going to talk about some of the things that are happening with rail cars and explosions and plants and explosions and gases and explosions. And apparently there were a number of cars that have some sort of fuel just kind of randomly placed on tracks near California farmland when that was discovered. Now we're into the explosive components of Mars and Pisces, even here, right? And we're going to have Mars creep up on Neptune. We're already in a wide square with Neptune now. And we've been dealing with this whole situation where it feels like everything is just flammable. It's all flammable, from East Palestine to the Central Valley in California, to highway in Arizona, to now there's an iron plant in Ohio, not far from East Palestine, also on fire. This is the explosive element. This is the combustibility. And we started to enter into that combustibility when everything started to kind of move into Pisces, right? Venus, Neptune was already there. Now we have the sun. So here we have a day where people just want safe harbor. Mars doesn't really allow that. The challenge with Mars here in the square is Mars and Gemini can be prickly. It can poke, right? It can poke, it can goad, which is the nature of Gemini in a lot of ways, specializing in playing the devil's advocate. And with Mars here, it's, you know, watch out for people that want to poke holes in your boat. Right? What happens when they poke holes in your boat, using a Piscean metaphor, you begin to sink. The other thing with Mars moon squares is, because we're dealing with Pisces, we're dealing with things that are really tidal, tidal. So things have been building up for a while. I mean, go back to, when do we want to go back? I mean, we can just keep going back and back and back. And we can see the tidal buildup of people's emotions easily over the last let's go back to when we go back to 2000, last 23 years. So we've had increasing periods where those emotions and those kind of tidal buildups have really accrued, have really ramped up, and probably none more than with the election of Donald Trump. And the fallout from that, the social fallout, and we know what the social fallout is. Everything from what happened during 2020, post 2020. Now we have the bizarre, surreal kabuki theater in Ukraine, and we have these ongoing, it looks like domestic terror events for all intents and purposes happening. And this is a buildup. So when you have Mars squaring the moon here, it's explosive. So if we wanted to take this out of the realm of what we might call fifth generation or asymmetric warfare, that these things that are happening are symbolic in a lot of ways. You know, if we didn't have the rabbit hole of the last 6 years, if we didn't have the rabbit hole of the last 6 years, we look at these events more from a Jungian perspective, right? Like that the train cars and all the things that are associated with these very explosive moments are manifestations of our inner life, right? That they are symbolic of our collective psyche, which is close to the brink of exploding. Is that true? Are the two mutually exclusive? Can we have something like a collective archetypal response? And at the same time, it also looking very much like there's something intentional behind it? I'd say absolutely. The two are not mutually exclusive. So when we look at these things, they're also symbolic of the tension and the intensity, the explosive and flammable nature of our own consciousness, because quite frankly, people are pissed off. And it's not just people who have been who have had their high beams on and their eyes opened. There are people who do not have their high beams on and do not have their eyes open who are pissed off, right? They're pissed off too. They don't always know what they're pissed off about. They think they know. You know, they're angry at what the handlers of this so-called reality tell them to be angry about. But again, it's still flammable, right? So you have a high degree of flammability on any number of people throughout any number of groups. And so what do we see in our environment? We see the explosive nature of the flammable inner world that we all have. And again, I'm going to say that it's not mutually exclusive. What is mutually exclusive is the Sun-Saturn conjunction, because they're just hanging out there, right? They're just by themselves. But now we have a shift in the sun. And the energy is moving towards less division. That's what happens with Pisces. We want less division. What's ironic and paradoxical about Pisces is that it's deeply, deeply polarizing, right? Pisces is very polarizing. It could be the most polarizing sign outside of Gemini and Aquarius in a lot of ways, because of the nature of Pisces. You know, Pisces combines within it, heaven and hell. You know, the dualism of Pisces, right, is all in there. You know, this is where we get things like Satan and God, or, the devil and God. It's all in the Pisces world. So, we have this dualistic function with Pisces, and yet paradoxically, we want to dissolve at the same time. It's a very complex sign. And today we have this Sun-Saturn conjunction, and people, you can see the sun starting to break away from Saturn. And I think there's as we move through the sun in Pisces in the early degrees, there's just a much higher degree of subjectivity. We're coming out of that clarity and austerity of the Sun-Saturn conjunction. We're coming out of that space. And now there's going to be more subjectivity as the sun breaks free from Saturn. There's some interesting energy today. One of the things that I was looking at in terms of an aspect of the sun is this quintile with Uranus. So here we have Uranus, and the quintile is, I believe it's 77 degrees. If I'm not, is it 70, 72 degrees? The biquintile is 144 degrees. So we can see the 72-degree orb kick in here with the sun and Uranus. And quintiles and biquintiles are interesting in astrology because they're somewhat like trines in that there is the ability for the energy to have a very fluid expression. And the definition of quintiles and biquintiles will differ from certain people. Now, there are some people in the astrological world who see the quintile and the biquintile as something that is carried on from lifetime to lifetime in the individual. That it is the sort of the gold mine that the individual brings into this lifetime, where they're able to tap into something that has a touch of genius or a touch of something that's extraordinary, divinely sort of guided in some ways. And I think that might be an appropriate description for the quintile or the biquintile. There's a quality of magic and a bit of otherworldliness that is associated with these aspects. They are not dissonant aspects. They're deeply harmonic, but the effects of them, I think, might be decidedly different than the trine. So in the trine, there's this whole idea of the trine that you bring the energy and the gift of the trine into this lifetime. The sextile is something you get to work out. You try it on for size, and you have the opportunity to experience it. The biquintile and the quintile, both coming from the same place, roughly. There's something about it that you don't have a lot of say in some ways, right? It happens of its own accord. It simply manifests in the individual's life, and how it manifests and for how long it manifests, TBD. TBD. It could be something that a person can tap into from time to time and have no real understanding about what they do or how they do what they do. It might be interesting to do kind of a survey of famous people, because we know with famous people, like if I were to look at Miles Davis's chart and see if there are quintiles and biquintiles in there, it might be interesting, right? Because it would represent in some ways the ability for not the individual to tap into the thing, but the thing to tap into the individual. And that would be something deep and profound. And that's the nature of the to the best of my ability to describe this thing that in many ways is often indescribable. Go ahead, do a search on biquintiles and quintiles in Google, and you'll find that it isn't always the easiest of the aspects to define, and I'm doing my best to do it right now. And so when we have a quintile with the sun and Uranus, after what I just said, what are we talking about here? Something miraculous, perhaps? Is this a day where we see something kind of mind-blowing out of the blue? There's another quintile today with Jupiter, and it's with Pluto. So it's a bit of a longer aspect here. But I'm focusing on this one because it's so transitory, right? So the sun will be in a different position tomorrow and the next day. So keep your eyes attuned. Let's see tomorrow. Let's reconvene here tomorrow and see if there's anything in the public space that we could look at and say, now that is a quintile. This is amazing. Something amazing happened. Something in Pisces, which could be borderline miraculous. So we'll keep our high beams on here. Venus has moved into Aries. Hot Venus in Aries is a hot topic. Let me tell you, everybody, any woman, well, I'll just use the word woman, any woman I've ever met who is Venus in Aries has kind of a smoldering sense of passion about them, right? It is, it is fiery. It is, Aries is energy, right? Aries is energy. So Venus in Aries, the person's going to express that energy through, personal contact, relationship. Yeah, and Venus in Aries is all about the now. Like, I want it now. The Venus in Libra is, you know, let's go through the courtship ritual. Venus in Aries is like, fuck the courtship ritual. Let's to quote Robert Smith and Cure, let's go to bed. That's Venus in Aries. And it's fresh, right? So watch out for Venus here. Venus is going to start moving through these degrees and catching up with Vesta. Well, you should be thinking about the long-term consequences of hooking up with Vesta here. It could also be indicative of meeting people very quickly who feel like they've been around for a long time. That's Vesta at the end of the cycle. And then the Venus Jupiter conjunction that's coming up, and that's going to be really interesting and quite beautiful to look at, by the way. We had some of it in when Venus was in Pisces, but it's going to be very interesting here with Venus Jupiter. You can still sort of see it. And in Aries, it's very hot, very fiery, very passionate. We get into Aries, we start talking about war as well. I don't think it's necessarily a war aspect. I think, if anything, people are trying to avoid war because Venus being the planet of peace, although you'll get some frothing warmongers, no doubt. Real quick here, we got Pluto camping out at 29 Capricorn. 29 Capricorn. And again, we have because it's the sign and the arithmetic, Venus in sextile with Pluto, which adds to the spiciness of Venus and Aries. Mercury has moved into second decan Aquarius, putting it in the Gemini decan. So there's a lot of inquisitive energy. And it's also devil's advocate energy, squaring up against Uranus. Mercury in Aquarius is the rebel, and the Gemini decan, willing to question anything. This is a very interesting day. Very, very interesting day. Emotions can run super hot with that Mars square, and Mercury squaring Uranus. It's not taking the company line. I don't think this is a bad day. I mean, I think it's an interesting day. And the part of today that really is fascinating for me is this Sun Saturn conjunction, and then the Sun quintile to Uranus. The energy for something magical and miraculous to happen almost spontaneously of its own accord. Let's keep an eye on what takes place, over the next couple days. I wonder if that even falls into the category of this woman. And I'm going to play the video on my 15 Minutes of Flame show of this woman in California who clearly has uncovered the fact that there are these rail cars with various types of fuel, and they're all just kind of abandoned, sitting there by farmland and the whatever water they have left in the Central Valley. That could be a Sun Uranus quintile moment, right? Like, all of a sudden it gets out, and the so-called architects, the architects, now all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, well, they found the rail cars. Guess we better do something a little different here. That's kind of, that might fall into the Uranus quintile to the Sun territory. But let's keep our eyes open and see what happens over the next 24 hours. Report back on that. All right. Who is the star of the day? Well, the star of the day is a very interesting person. The star of the day is Anais Nin, who is a fantastic writer, absolutely fantastic writer. Very interesting person. Lived and played by her own rules. Here's one of her quotes. What everyone forgets is that passion is not merely a heightened sensual fusion, but a way of life which produces, as in the mystics, an ecstatic awareness of the whole of life. Wow, isn't that an interesting quote? So where do we see that in her chart? Nin, known for her eloquent waxings on the romantic life, the sensual life, bordering on the mystical life, while at the same time championing the uh, the story and the place of women in society. Nin could easily be called a feminist in a lot of ways. I mean, she has some very interesting quotes along those lines, but she is clearly not the same kind of feminist as the first and second wave of feminism. She's playing by her own rules. So we're going to explore her chart a little bit here. We have the Sun Jupiter conjunction. Look at that in Pisces. Talk about feeling, right? And where is it? It's in her fifth house. And what do we associate the fifth house with? Love, passion, and Nin has plenty of that. She's got love and passion to freaking burn. And what's it doing? Trining Neptune, Pallas, and then Cancer on the midheaven. She's very water based. In fact, she has a quote that I almost put up there that refers to a mermaid. She refers to mermaids on more than one occasion in her literary work. But I think first and foremost, while she does have Mars in the first house, the true node in the first house in Libra, which I do believe is her calling card for being a strong woman and one who wants to live by her own rules, one who sees women as kind of an unexplored country that has been in many ways cordoned off and the borders sealed during her times. She is unapologetically free, right? These are the terms and conditions that Anais Nin lived by with her life. So you can see this very strong Mars, but it's in a sign of Venus, right, in Libra. So to me, that's the calling card of her quote unquote feminism, right? It's just her energy. And with the true node, she's here to explore that. She's also here to explore men, which she does. Famous romance, of course, with Henry Miller. Here we have Jupiter, Sun, and then Neptune is the highest planet in her chart. And a long time ago, I used to get, well, I still do, but there was a period where I got a ton of readings from people who were Cancer rising and Gemini rising. I'm like, why am I getting all these readings from these Cancer and Gemini rising people? And I figured it out. It was like, oh, it's the midheaven. They have Pisces on the midheaven. Not every Gemini rising person, but some. I'm like, oh, it's the Pisces. They want to know where they're going, right? So I did a kind of a cross section of people born. Again, these are famous people who either had Pisces on the midheaven or Neptune on the midheaven. And what I found was a large portion of them were very fine artists. They were mystics, but there were mystics there, but they were fine artists like composers and sculptors and painters. Picasso was up there. I remember Picasso and Bernstein, Leonard Bernstein. And that's the calling card of Neptune. And it's here in her quote, right? It's here in her quote, as in the mystics and ecstatic awareness of the whole of life. And we see Neptune in conjunction with the midheaven and Pallas here. And, she's got these major planets, the Titans of the chart, retrograde. I think that's another discussion in and of itself. But we can see the flow, the deep flow of the romantic notion of living and life and the self, and this idea that she would dissolve into whatever kind of situation or moods. And she was not afraid of dark moods or storm. One of her poems, she waxes poetically about a storm and how the storm reveals itself from all these different perspectives, and finally God is addressing this great storm that's taking place. And you can see this in her chart too, right? She has a bit of a stormy chart. The Venus square with Pluto, that's stormy, that's intense, that's deep. Venus square Pluto takes her into the underworld, and she's not afraid of it, right? She's not afraid of exploring these deeper, darker, more sensual and forbidden areas of the chart and of her life. And Venus squaring Uranus and the moon, again, she's kind of breaking ranks with convention. It's interesting that she had an affair with Henry Miller, who was another writer. So we see Venus in the sixth house, which is work and the companionship, but it was never going to work, right? This is challenging, totally challenging, doomed to fail. And Uranus moon, her moon is in this very kind of austere and stoic Capricorn, but Uranus is in Sagittarius, which is really interesting. It's conjunct the galactic center. So she has a kind of observational moon. There's a bit of the voyeur in Nin. And it's almost like when you read her work, she's like, or her quotes, bring it on. Bring it on. I'm willing to sacrifice anything, comfort, anything in order to be free. Right. So she has that kind of rugged utilitarian moon in Capricorn, and then the, more experimental and radical expression with Uranus here. She's a really interesting person. And you can see her chart play out. And the thing about Nin, which is fascinating, is that for all her forays into emotion and passion, she is not sentimental. There's not a bone of sentimentality. And she does talk about things like lineage and family line. And, she talks about, how the casual encounter between two people manifests in the evolution of a bloodline, right? She gets into these really interesting creases and folds of, how we're intimate and the outcome of the intimacy, but she's never, ever sentimental. And you can see it, like that moon is not sentimental. Mercury in Aquarius and Saturn in Aquarius, again, not real sentimental. And I think in a lot of ways, as a literary character, she's very underrated, highly underrated. And you can kind of see this, right? Again, Mercury, Saturn, standing alone. But to me, this is the literary nature of her work. And she's more known as a personality. I mean, there was a movie made about her and Henry Miller, and Henry and June with Uma Thurman. She was in there. Fred Ward plays Henry Miller. It's an interesting movie. If you want to see kind of a characterization of Anais Nin in action, Philip Kaufman movie. A very interesting character. And you can see her chart play out. It's here, right? This is her life in the wheel. All right, that's our star of the day, Anais Nin. And with that, we wrap things up. A little bit long today, but hey, it's the first day of Pisces. We can let it flow. So let me bring up my graphic. If you want to jump in on a different topic, but related, join me at 15 Minutes of Flame. That's 9:11 a.m. Central Standard Time. We go to 10:41. I know it's an hour and a half. The great thing about this show is you can go back and watch it. If it's not just, hey, you got to be there. It's there on my website. You could watch it. I also stream live on Rumble. So there's a 15 Minutes of Flame page on Rumble. And so you can go there after the show as well. I also have a podcast that I launch. It's distributed throughout the podcast network. And that happens later on in the day. So there's a lot of different ways you can participate, either live or after the fact. And of course, I've got to give a shout out to True Hemp Science. True Hemp Science provides some of the fuel for my coffee. I've got some moon dust in here today, and love to start my day with a little pinch of moon dust. in my coffee, which is a CBD related product that my buddy Chris has come up with. It's delicious. Gives you a slight lift, a little bit of focus, a little bit of clarity. And it's one of many products he has over at truehemscience.com. When you check out, put in 15MINS when you check out at True Hem Science. And what do you get? You'll get free product if you spend $100 or more. And if you spend $150 more, you get free shipping. So there we go. That's the business of the day. That's the Astro Weather for the day. Thanks for being here. Have a blessed day. Take care. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time. Bye for now.